Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Howdy again, musical talkers. It's David here again. Thanks so much to those of you who tuned into my chat with Stanley Silverman. The episode was very popular indeed, and thank you so much for your wonderful feedback. Now, for those of you with good ears, you may recall that in that episode I mentioned briefly that this was to be a two-part series of conversations, and today's episode is indeed an interview with yet another great creator of musical theater. Now, this conversation brought me all the way to New York City, where my special guest today was kind enough to meet with me in none other than the world-famous Sardi's restaurant. I popped upstairs to their lovely bar area, surrounded by the famous Hirschfeld caricatures, and had a chat with writer and lyricist Stephen Cole. Now, Stephen was kind enough to chat with me about his extensive career in musical theater, and has even allowed me to share some of his work throughout today's episode. So before we set sail in our illness-proof internet bubble to New York, let's first hear a song from The Road to Qatar, entitled Here's Looking at You, music by David Crane, and lyrics by today's guest, Stephen Cole.
Amazing. It's like meeting me.
David, tell me this. Did you get to go to your first Broadway show before you were 11?
Yes. Did you know when you were in that very last row that you were just as close to heaven?
I did. Did you know when that overture played that you strayed into where you always longed to be?
Of course. Did you ever look one row behind and then suddenly find there was a kid who looked just like you and it was me?
No, that never happened.
Yes, 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 yes.
What'll you have?
I'll tell you what I won't have. A mirror, because I was looking into one. Look at those cheeks, pinchably red. Seeing them glow may just go to my head. Here's looking at you, kid. Here's looking at us.
Look at that skin, smooth as a stone. I thought that secret was mine all alone.
Here's looking at you, kid, for I should have known. I'm one of a pair, pardon my stare, but you're staring back at the lack of my hair. Could this be any queerer? You're like a short, cute Jewish mirror. Look how you bounce, cute as a pup.
Look in my eyes, you won't have to look up.
Here's looking at you, kid. There's so much more to discuss. But first, here's a toast for whatever it's worth. Here's to we way I stayed separated at birth. Here's looking at you, kid. Here's looking at us. All right. We didn't look exactly alike. This wasn't the Prince.
Folks, this is very exciting. We're coming to you from none other than world-famous Sardi's here on 44th Street in New York City. And I'm talking to Mr. Stephen Cole. Stephen, welcome to the program,
Well,
sir.
thank you so much. It's so nice to be in Sardi's always. You know that Sardi's is almost 100 years old. Next year, it's 100.
I would have had no idea that was that old. I would have said like the teens of the,
It opened down the block at 1921.
Oh, I see.
And then they built the St. James.
Yeah.
And so they had to build their own building. We're in that space. In 1925, it was in this space.
And it was Vincent Sardi, is that
Yeah,
right?
the original owner. Yeah, absolutely.
And now who's running it now?
It's family owned
Yeah.
still, yeah, because they own the whole building.
Is it grandson or great-grandson that's running it?
You know, I
Or
don't
grandchild?
know. I don't know. I don't think the actual name. I met Vincent Sardi Jr.,
Yeah,
who was
yeah.
the son, and he autographed a book for me, but I don't know past that.
It's a great spot. It's going to be a
Yeah.
perfect spot for an interview. And Stephen, can I call you Stephen?
Of course, please.
You're an award-winning book and lyrics writer of musical theater with an incredible canon. We're going to get into some of that later.
Great.
But start at the very beginning and
Yes.
let us know how you got started in the business, where your love of theater came from in particular when you decided to
Oh
start
gosh,
writing.
well, one day we were walking down this block. There was no movie to see, and I was about 8 or 9. And I pointed up and I said, "Why can't we see that movie?" And it was Hello Dolly. and she went in, my mother, and bought a $3 ticket.
No way.
And we climbed up to the
Wow.
last row of the balcony. and it just changed my life. And then I became a performer first before I was a writer.
Okay.
And years later, when I was in the business, my mother said, "Oh, I wish I took him to a hospital." I might have become a doctor.
Too funny.
But Dolly became very important to me, and I got to see it twice, two different Dollys, and Betty Grable and Ethel Merman, who closed it.
darned.
So that really began my love of the theater, and I just started going. And in those days, you could go on your babysitting money. A top ticket was $10. So it was, and I started in summer stock at 14 because I found I could sing, and they took me, and I became an apprentice. And
Fascinating. What kind of shows were you doing at that age?
oh gosh, they did 1 week summer stock. They did George M. and Cabaret and Fiddler and Camelot and Do I Hear a Waltz? And anytime there was a kid part, because I was 14 and looked 12, I got those parts. And so that was kind of wonderful.
Oh, that's good fun.
Yeah, and then I wrote my first show at 15 because why not? I had a Selectric typewriter and got it produced at 16 in Brooklyn College. So I had an incredible experience directing and choreographing and being in it and writing it. That's the only way you can learn how to write musicals, literally diving in that pool. And that was amazing. That's how it all began.
Tell us about that very first piece that you wrote.
It was called Everything's Fine. And have you ever seen Anything Goes?
Oh, yes.
Then you've seen Everything's Fine. I basically was a Cole Porter fanatic. I learned how to write from his lyrics. And I thought, well, I'll just do a 1930s musical just like he might have done in the 1930s. And it was about a nightclub singer named Sally Sweeney, not Reno Sweeney. And it had its own plot, and it had pieces of Pal Joey in it. It had pieces of every show. But it was an homage to the 30s. And I wrote the lead for Bette Midler. She didn't do it. But we got it produced there when I was a kid. And then 10 years later in another theater in Brooklyn did it. And I was able to then 10 years later rewrite it as an adult.
Oh, really?
And
no
that
kidding.
was
You
kind
revisited it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they did it twice, so that was kind of exciting. And now it's gone. It's
back in the drawer.
It's back where it belongs. Yeah.
Oh, how fascinating. So when you moved on from sort of the age of 15, 16 into your college years, what did you go and train for then? What was your degree in?
I went to Brooklyn College, and I still thought I would just be an actor. I didn't stay because I kept getting jobs. I was very lucky, and as I said, I looked really young when I was just young, but I looked really young. And so I kept getting work, and I was in Equity, and I was in SAG, and I was in AFTRA, and I did whatever movies came up here in New York. I was in every movie that was made in the early 80s, and I did To Kill a Mockingbird. In fact, I was Dill, and now they are 30, but I was only 19, playing 10 or 12, and we did that in Indiana. So I had a nice little acting career that kind of ended when I was 21, when I stopped looking like a kid and became an adult. And I started to figure out, what other areas I liked. And actually the writing was always my first love, and I never thought it could possibly really happen. And I'm still not thinking that. I'm still working on that. But I'm lucky I've had 14 of my musicals produced, so that's pretty amazing.
And so when did your first piece, is it After the Fair?
That wasn't the first, actually. The first produced piece, because I was writing After the Fair at the same time as I was writing Dodsworth, and Dodsworth was the first one that got on.
Oh, I see.
So I had two different collaborators at the same time, two different composers, Matthew Ward for After the Fair and Jeff Saver for Dodsworth. And I didn't know that was a good idea. It just happened because one was working here, I was faster than them. And then the one that boiled on the pot soonest was Dodsworth, which starred Hal Linden and Dee Hoade. And I was really a great first experience at Casa Mañana in Fort Worth, Texas. And to work with stars was amazing. And to be thrown into the fire of, oh my God, you have to rewrite every single day. And even after the opening, we did major rewrites because that's why we were in Texas. And it was an amazing experience. And especially working with Hal, because Hal Linden, who maybe your people know him, but he was a TV star in Barney Miller. He won the Tony for the Rothschilds. He was in a ton of shows from Bells Are Ringing on with with Judy Holliday. And he was coming back to the theater for the first time with our show. And he was not easy to work with.
Fair
He
enough.
was interesting. Well, because he was nervous. He had to learn all this material, and it changed daily.
And the rewrites,
and he was learning new songs, and we didn't write those songs for his voice. We wrote those songs for a bigger, more operatic voice. So we wound up rewriting songs completely
Goodness
for him.
me.
It was a great experience, I have to say.
For the benefit of the listeners, could you remind us what the plotline of Dodsworth
Oh,
is?
yeah, so Dodsworth is based on a Sinclair Lewis novel,
Yeah.
which then became a Sidney Howard play and a very famous film with Walter Huston and Ruth Chatterton, no one knows her name, but Mary Astor, and David Niven's first movie. And it's about a 60-ish car manufacturer, think Henry Ford, who's retiring from his business. He's rich, he lives in the Midwest, as all Sinclair Lewis people do, and he has a much younger wife of 40, who is always thought of now as an old grandmother because her daughter is married. And they take their first European vacation, and they get on the ship and go to Europe, and she starts to stray from the marriage. It's a story of a marriage falling apart, really, and a husband who has put the wife on a pedestal. It's a very adult story. I saw the film. I had to get the rights. We did, and it's one of my favorite pieces that hasn't been done since. It's amazing. We did it. We had producers interested in here in New York. They died. We did a workshop
me.
later on. We had John Cullum playing the lead. We had Christine Ebersole. We had wonderful people in the show, but it just kind of faded away after a while. It's maybe too sophisticated and adult for today's Broadway, and it's a big show. Whereas After the Fair, which I was writing at the same time, based on Thomas Hardy, only has 4 actors and 4 musicians, which made it eminently producible. And so when it premiered also in Texas, where I started most of my shows, I don't know why, I'm from Brooklyn, but Texas happened. It then was very successful, won awards there, and went off Broadway, and then did come to London.
That's right.
And yeah, which was very exciting. That was the first time I got to go to London.
And do you remember where it
It was
premiered
at the
there?
King's Head,
Okay.
in
Good space.
Islington.
Yeah,
Great.
that's right.
It was I think the space has changed a little now because it used to be more pub-like then, and you'd sit sideways on little benches, and the stage was smaller than a postage stamp. So basically, you could only see people from the waist up. So it was like watching a musical in close-up, which worked perfectly for this 4-character piece. And of course, it worked better over there, I think, because the accents were real. I mean, here we had to have dialect people for North Country accents and that kind of thing, and they didn't really. It was it was a lot of work for not a lot of payback because nobody really knew the difference between a Cockney and a North Country, but we did. So it was really great, and also the class distinctions, which is Thomas Hardy, work better in England. So it was a great show there.
And so how was it trying to adapt a British piece? And who were you collaborating with?
That was
point?
Matthew Ward.
Okay.
And it was easy. It was because it wasn't that it was British. It was these 4 interesting characters. They were just so interesting. And it had already been a play called The Day After the Fair, which we did not base ours on. We based it on the original short story. I opened it up a little bit for the men became bigger characters than they were in the story. So it was a wonderful experience. But once again, when I was really just starting, I didn't know anything would ever get produced. And so you just keep writing, and you keep doing workshops, and you keep doing readings, and you do demos. And then finally, when you get on a stage in front of a real audience is when you know what you have.
Right.
And you keep rewriting and changing. And I think every single time, from Texas to Chicago, then to off-Broadway, then to London, it changed every time. Especially, I think London is my final version, version. And we'll see. I'd love to do it again over there because it got wonderful reviews, and it was one of those shows that should have moved from Islington to the West End, but there wasn't enough money. There just wasn't enough.
Such as life.
Yes.
So you had the success with After the Fair in London. What year was that?
That was 99.
Okay, so that's not too long ago.
Yeah, no, not too long ago.
Okay.
And but then before that, of course, I keep mentioning Texas. We went back again right after the fair was in Texas with another musical to Casa Mañana, and that was Gross Singers. And Gross Singers was with yet another composer, the great Clabe Richardson, who people might know wrote The Grass Harp. And I pursued Clabe, which I know is an odd name. It was Claiborne. He was a very Southern gentleman.
Oh, okay.
And Clabe, I thought The Grass Harp was one of the most gorgeous scores. And he also wrote another show called Lola, which was exquisite. And so I pursued him, because I think he was in retirement then, and found his phone number in the New York phone book, and said, we should write a show together. And it didn't turn out to be the show I wanted to write with him, which was Time After Time, which I wrote with later on with Jeff Saber. But we started to have conversations about what he wanted to write. And he wanted to write The Night of the Hunter, which we did start to do. But at the same time, he was working on a musical about Gross Singers, which is about the Catskill Mountains and the whole Jewish Borscht Belt and Jenny Grossinger. And he was working on that with Ronnie Graham, who was a great lyricist himself and writer. He wrote a lot of the Mel Brooks movies and New Faces of 52. And Ronnie quit. And so they were left with a show that was unfinished. And he said, well, would you read this? And I did. And I was the perfect person, because I had been to the Catskills and I knew that whole milieu of Borscht Belt jokes, and I loved it. And so I dove into that at the same time as we were writing The Night of the Hunter, which had songs like I'm going to wash away my sins in the river Jesus. We were writing about the Jews in the Catskills. And so I was one, Clave was the Jesus half and I was the Jew half. It was very funny. But we got Gross Singers on first. Because I had the relationship at Casa Mañana, and we had the same director, Bruce Lumpkin, and we brought in 2 stars, which was the way to go when you need to sell tickets and you're a nobody. So we had Gavin MacLeod, who was right off the Love Boat then, and Mary Tyler Moore, and who was a doll, and Ruta Lee, who was one of the original 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, but she happened to be a Fort Worth star.
Okay.
Every time they did a musical like Hello Dolly or Mame, she starred in it. So she did that show. And it was quite an experience doing that one. So that was really the next chronologically. Also didn't come to New York, but it became another musical, a smaller one, because I learned my lesson from After the Fair. It's easier to get a small musical on than a huge Broadway musical. So we took the 20 characters in Gross Singers and turned it into 5.
Wow.
And it became a show called Saturday Night at Gross Singers, which played in Long Island, where it belonged, and Florida, its spiritual home, and LA for 4 months, which was really great. So that show is coming back to life again, which I'm excited. I can't talk about it, but I'm hoping another West Coast thing, because it's a fun show, and because of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which deals in some of the Catskills in many of its episodes, people know what it is again, and that's nice. Because even then, even when we did it in '99 and 2000 or whatever it was, 2001, it was a forgotten area of history. And we were told, well, we'll do the show in Texas, but listen, there are no Jews here. So you have to cut every oi and
Okay.
And I did.
Yeah.
And then I put them all back in when we did later on, because I said, there's no show here if it's not Jewish.
Right.
And believe it or not, there were plenty of Jews in Texas, and they all came to the show.
Right.
They all talk like this, but they came.
That still counts.
And that was good.
Oh, lovely. So, Stephen, I want to go back to what you were mentioning before about your having been influenced by Cole Porter. Now, you started out having that influence, so how did you eventually find your own voice in the industry?
Well, I've had to find my own voice, obviously.
Right.
But the craft, I went to Cole Porter School. I took those lyrics, dissected them as you would take a table apart and put it back together, figured out why those rhymes were there, why it all came together the way it did, why he was funny. And so I'm still keep the craft. The craft is very important to me, but once you let yourself loose a little bit, and of course over the years Sondheim has influenced a lot. He can't not influence you if you've seen. I was lucky enough to see every one of his musicals from Company On. So I would come out of those shows as a kid and go, I want to do that. I can't believe it. I can remember seeing A Little Night Music and thinking, those are the greatest lyrics I will ever hear. And they were just so amazingly rich and complex in the rhymes. And so I do really believe in that kind of structure. I believe in real rhymes. I believe there's a reason for real rhymes, because the ear, when you're in the theater, picks it up so much faster. You will not get comedy with false rhymes. You might if you do something filthy, but mostly it really bothers me to hear false rhymes and mushy lyrics. And what it does is it takes your ear and it puts it somewhere else. It lets it rest, and you want a sharp ear. The same, and so that's what I'm doing. And I'm writing for character, of course, too, now, more than I would have when I started with Cole Porter. Although he wrote for his character, and I'm not him anymore. But I did change my name to Stephen Cole because of him. It was really Stephen Mitchell. But I did that because one of the unions had a Stephen Mitchell in it, and the Actors Equity, so I had to change it on the spot, and I did it.
I'll be darned.
So it is my tribute forever.
So, Stephen, I realize we're jumping ahead a little bit into your canon here, but I want to start talking specifically about pieces like Merman's Apprentice and your Mary Martin piece that you've written as well, which are wonderful tributes to that golden era of Broadway history. Tell us how you got in to start writing those pieces, and tell us specifically about some of them, please.
Well, that's more current affairs.
Yes.
Well, Merman's, which is very current because we just did a great production in Sonoma, California. Drank a lot of wine and got great reviews, and but it came out of my love of Merman, which led me to be. I was her friend for the last 2 years of her life, so I know that ages me a lot. as the years go on, I've said, well, I was her friend 5 years after she died. No, but she was a funny, vulnerable, regular lady from New York who happened to be the biggest star on Broadway. And we became friends, and she came to my house and watched videos of herself. She sat cross-legged on the floor, and she pointed herself and said, "You see me there? It's 1966, and I wasn't wearing a bra. If I did that now, they'd hit the floor." And I knew, as I remembered all these things, that there were so many stories I had, and I wrote a short story about a little girl named Muriel Plackenstein who runs away from home in 1970. On this very block on 44th, she emerges and sees the marquee that says Ethel Merman and Hello Dolly. Merman takes her to lunch at Sardi's, right where we're sitting. Muriel, the little 12-year-old girl, knows everything about her career, so Ethel likes her a lot. She takes her back to rehearsal. They sing together. The kid has talent. So David Merrick, the producer, comes down from the balcony and says, "I'm going to star you in the first all-child cast of Hello Dolly." And so Merman takes her under her wing, and she becomes Merman's Apprentice. And I really got the idea because I was commissioned to write a musical called Merlin's Apprentice. And I said, I don't want to do that. I want to do Merman's Apprentice as a joke. And so years later, it became what it was supposed to be. And now I have two shows that sound alike. And so... but it is a true tribute to the golden age of musical theater. It's a totally original show with fabulous music by David Evans, and it is a tribute to that era, but they're original songs that sort of could have been written then, not so much pastiche even, but they just sound like a musical comedy used to sound, and we love that a lot. So that's what's happening with that one, and we're hoping for the next production now, and eventually, get it more east. We're moving east from the west. But we did it here at Birdland down the block, which is a famous jazz club, 2 sold-out performances. We got a cast album of a show that doesn't have an original cast. So it's an original cast album, and that has done really well. That's on J Records, and I knew John Yap, of course, who's because he did the cast album of my show with David Crane, The Road to Qatar, which played off-Broadway and then went to London and Edinburgh Festival. So I said to him, "You want to record this concert?" And he didn't record it live. We went into the studio and did a fabulous album. So I'm really proud of that. So we're like, it's our selling tool now. We're ahead of the game. The way Andrew Lloyd Webber used to make records and then get the shows on later. So we've gotten the show on because of the CD, and now we're moving on.
Being a Broadway star, it's not a job. It's a calling. It's like taking the veil. 8 shows you show without fail. No matter how you may feel, you show or the show is a failure. It's like taking a vow. 8 shows you show and you bow. You give your all, that's the deal, no matter what happens to ail ya. Yes, you give up a lot every day just to get through each night till you're done. To them you're a luminous star, but what you are, kid, is a nun. You're alert on day 1 and dead by day 4. So Muriel, baby, beware what you pray for. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy belting a song. But by Saturday night, your belt starts to tighten, your knuckles get white, and you wail. But if you can just stay awake till you go home and make your Saturday supper and break out the mail, you recover on Sunday and start again Monday, taking the veil, taking the veil.
But there's gotta be more. What about
As far as Mary Martin, I met her through Ethel. I wouldn't say she was my friend, in quotes, but we were acquaintances, and I spoke to her on the phone, and we did letters, not emails, real letters. And then when her 100th birthday was approaching, she was gone, of course, I came up with the idea of doing a tribute to her. A review called Inventing Mary Martin, and the York Theater off-Broadway here in New York did it, and it was one of the greatest experiences because I got to direct it and to write it. I had a wonderful cast, Jason Gra and people like that, and Emily Skinner, and it really was a joy to see exactly what I wanted to see on the stage. And I don't want to direct all my shows, but that one I really wanted to do, and it was very multimedia. I know that's a very 80s word, but it had media, it had video, and it had stuff. But Mary Martin only appeared in photos, so any of the songs we did, which were her numbers, it's not an original musical, were done in new ways. David Crane did all new arrangements, but they were never, we didn't have her voice on the stage. We had all these wonderful performers doing it, so it was great, and I'd love to do that again too, but I don't know where. And and the problem with that show, as opposed to Merman's Apprentice, which could be called Lady Gaga's Apprentice, because it's just about a great star and a little girl who's her apprentice. Inventing Mary Martin does request that you know something about who she was and those shows. Yeah. And people do know The Sound of Music in South Pacific and One Touch of Venus, but still, it's harder. And I always wonder if it would go in London, where she was a big star. She played the Drury Lane several times.
That's right.
But time goes by.
Yeah.
Time goes by. So, yes.
What is it particularly about these two women that you think has stuck with us, certainly on the American side of the ocean? Why did their legacies endure so much?
Well, they were the two greatest stars of musical theater, period. Merman was called the Queen of Broadway. Mary called herself the First Lady of Broadway musicals. But they fought for that title. But I think what they did was created a kind of fake rivalry that was more of a press agent's dream. And so by the time they sang together in 1953 on the Ford 50th anniversary show, it was such an event to have these two. They were completely different types, and yet Mary did Annie Get Your Gun, and they both did Hello Dolly. Their careers crossed in certain ways, but you couldn't really see Merman as Nellie Forbush or Maria von Trapp.
Right.
But Mary had the versatility to cross over into the Merman territory. So they were both just stars that don't exist anymore. You can't name a Broadway star like Merman, who did 40 years on Broadway in all those hit shows, and that it just doesn't happen anymore. People want to make money. She made money, but she didn't, and she loved making movies, but it didn't really work out the way she wanted, and certainly didn't work out for Mary, who made a lot of movies at Paramount. And we did a whole section in the show about her movie career, and nobody knew that she had done, 9 movies at Paramount. So they represent to me that incredible time when the Broadway musical was the king. And it's not the same anymore, because now it is a tourist place, New York, as opposed to, in those days, New Yorkers went to the theater. And then some wealthier people came and visited here. But mostly, that's why shows can run 30 years like Phantom. Because there's all this crossing over from every other country. But in those days, if a show like Anything Goes, which was one of the biggest hits of the 30s, ran one season, that was great.
That was a hit.
And Annie Get Your Gun was a huge hit at 3.5 years. Dolly was the longest running show at 6.5 years. It's kind of crazy. But that's because audiences have grown to be worldwide. It also means that where the common denominator is moving down the ladder a little bit, just the way it is. And people prefer to go see a star that they've heard of from the movies or TV, rather than, this is a Broadway star. And we just don't have those as much anymore. They have to go out and make a name. Sutton Foster had to go to TV to come back to Broadway. And, but in the old days, she just would have done show after show after show and not cared about that kind of fame and money. But it's not the old days. So that's why.
Sure. Now, you've had a career, as you said, in the past as an actor, and of course, the writing, directing your own work as well. And you've also got credits as a producer as well, some fascinating ones, with other people that you've worked with in the industry, some known names doing concert events and things like that. Can you touch on that a little?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a producer ever. When I worked with, I did a lot of benefits, and I was really billed as the writer. But we got together and threw out all the names of who we wanted to be in these fabulous events, like a tribute to Angela Lansbury and tributes to Cantor and Ebb, and we got them. And I picked up the phone and called Liza Minnelli, and as you do, because you have to. But I never thought of myself as a producer in that way. But even when I was, as I said, and I've only directed that one show, but I always have my hand in everywhere, and to the consternation probably of other directors. I like to have a little whisper in the ear. But I wrote these things, so it's important to me. But I was lucky, to work with a lot of big stars because of those benefits, and it was fun. And I got to know some of them, like Dorothy Loudon. When I wrote special material for Dorothy Loudon for some of these things, we got to like each other, and then I could pick up the phone and call her to be on the CD of Night of the Hunter, for example, and to do other things like that, and we became friendly. Same thing with Marlo Thomas, who was that girl. I started out by writing special material for her songs, and I've done that for 20 years, and then I wrote the book about that girl. So things start to connect in that way, and that's nice. And I guess it all really goes back to Merman, because I was just Merman's friend. We had no professional connection at all, and I thought, even then, I said, well, now you've been with the star you love the best, you've been friends with her, nobody else should intimidate you ever again.
Sure.
And it's true, and working with people is different. People tend, they try to intimidate you sometimes, but mostly not. And stars are interesting, and they're usually just as scared as you are. That I learned from Hal Linden. That was, any of his problematic behavior was always because the guy had to learn 12 songs and 100 pages, and I learned that as a kid. And, I was the kid. Hey, kid, he would say.
So what's coming up for you then? What's in the pipeline, if anything, that you are allowed to discuss?
Yes. Well, Goin Hollywood, which is a brand new musical with David Crane, who I wrote The Road to Qatar. And The Road to Qatar, you could look it up. Go on YouTube and watch the video, The Road to Qatar, because that story is about how David and I met. We were put together by an Arab producer from Dubai to do a show in Qatar for the Emir of Qatar, and that experience was so insane. And we went all over the world, from Dubai to Qatar to London to Bratislava, and we had this incredible show in Qatar, and that became a small, wonderful musical called The Road to Qatar. So I have the Arabs to thank for my relationship with David, and then we started writing this show, which was our big musical, and Goin Hollywood is an original. Again, I like writing originals. I liked basing things, but I love not having to deal with rights and that kind of stuff. So an original, it's about it. A lot of it takes place in 1949 at MGM in Hollywood. It's about these two writers from this day and age, from 2020, who wish so hard that they could be back in the golden age of movies and write musicals the way Comden and Green did, that they go to a restaurant which is called the Super Chief Dining Car at Grand Central Station, and it starts moving cross country and back in time.
No kidding.
And they wind up having their dream and their wish, but finding out that 1949 Hollywood is really not a place to be if you know anything about the blacklist and anti-Semitism and racism and all those wonderful things that made the 50s fun.
Sure.
But so they learn that every time is up the same time, and that and during the course of that we learn about their relationship and their love story. And so it's a big fat show, obviously. We thought, we'll never get this one on. Oh my God. And it's being produced where? In Texas. A new theater that we haven't been to in Dallas, Texas, and we're very excited. In June of 21, so we're doing workshops before then, and so that's coming up on the horizon. I'm doing a one-man show in April. Surprise!
Wow. Tell us about that a
and
little
the
bit.
one-man show, which I don't really have titled yet, but I'm thinking of calling. It's my one-man stand-up routine about that whole experience in the Middle East. And I want to call it Camelton. Or something like that. I don't know. But it is, well, because it might, people might mistake it for Hamilton. Hamilton. But it's a stand-up routine, and with a few songs I'm going to throw into, and I'm going back to the same theater that did Everything's Fine, my original first musical, and I'm going to do 2-night benefit to see how it goes. It's scary as hell, but I like performing, but doing stand-up comedy is really frightening.
Right.
But I've been developing this over the years with small audiences, and it works. And we shall see. It's a great story. So I'm still milking the same Middle East experience as much as I can milk it. I think a book is next.
Well, the experience as chaotic as what you're describing does make for great material.
Oh, yeah.
People want to hear the story.
It'll never happen again. It was an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime thing. It all started with an email that said, "We want you, write musical, how much?" And I went, okay, here we go. We didn't believe it for a long time, but it turned out to be real. And Amazing. It was just chaotic and crazy. And we had an incredible time doing it. So we got a show out of it. So David and I are still writing, which is the best thing that came out of the whole thing. And so when we get Goin Hollywood on Broadway, then maybe Road to Qatar can come back again as off Broadway.
Say, is that a picture of your mom and dad?
Yeah.
Do you miss them? I know I miss mine.
Of course I do. But I'm lucky, Donald.
Lucky?
Yup. 'Cause even though I haven't seen them in a long time, they told me to wait right here and they'd be back. And I have to believe them. So that's what I'm doing, waiting.
It can't be easy.
Nothing worth having ever is. I know they're coming soon. I'm sure there's only been a slight delay. And when they can, I know they'll write and sing that they are halfway home. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll hear their voices on the telephone. And they will tell me what I've always known, that they are halfway home. One day, I know they'll walk through that door, and I'll get presents galore, and won't be lonely anymore. Each time I see the moon, I make a wish and say a little prayer, that when I wake up they'll be standing there, and promise not to roam, and I sleep a little better knowing they are halfway home.
Because it did start there when I didn't write it, and it played the West End, but it was a completely different show.
This was Casper the Friendly Musical.
Yes.
Yes. So
Yeah.
one did play in London.
But not my show.
I see. Okay, and it happened with a very extraordinary cast as well, didn't it? So tell us about
The
that.
original, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been done a couple of times, yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So when was the original production of Casper then?
With Cheetah, like 2003, I think.
Okay, so still not that long ago.
No.
in the
I
grand
mean,
scheme of
it's all
things.
this century.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just did what I thought was the best production in the Children's Theater of Cincinnati. It got rave reviews in this fall, but it all started when I was sent to London. When I was doing After the Fair in Islington, I went to see a musical called Casper, and the producer who wanted to bring it to New York sent me to see it. And did he think I could maybe fix it? Okay. And I went with my collaborator, Matthew Ward, and I thought it was not fixable. And I said, no, I can't do anything with this, and he didn't speak to me for months. It was a producer I had worked with. And then I got a phone call from the director and the producer, and the director was so sweet to me and said, oh, I love your CDs and I love your shows. And he was so nice. I said, all right, I'll meet with you. So I met with him, and I decided I would write a whole new musical with using the same character, Casper and his uncles, and they said yes. Okay. I thought they'd say no. So they said yes, and I wrote the show with that director, and I wrote it. I wanted to write in a star character. I thought something a little more sophisticated than Stinky, Fatso, and Stretch, his uncles.
Right.
And so I wrote a part for Cheetah Rivera. Never in my wildest dreams thinking I would get Cheetah Rivera to play the part. And we got her. And so that meant rewriting the show more. She was still dancing. She was singing. She was fabulous and incredible to work with. Sure. And we did that at Pittsburgh CLO, which then toured all summer to all the big summer stocks in Dallas, in all over the place, Atlanta. And that did really well, but it went away. And Cheetah moved on to The Visit. And it went away for many years because of rights problems with the Ghost. He kept being bought by different companies.
Oh, I see.
And finally, this theater, this fabulous children's theater, and I'm talking about Broadway caliber, decided they were going to pursue the rights again. And we found out that Universal NBC now owned that little Ghost, and they said yes. And I got to rewrite the show for the umpteenth time, more towards the children's market. Cheetah's role got a little less, but it was still fun. And we had flying, we had everything, and it was the most wonderful experience. And so now we're hoping it will go on more, and every school will do it.
Right.
But it's you never ever know. I guess that's the point. You never know what's going to come back and haunt you, like Casper. And it came back out of the blue, and because they found me on my website, the same that the Arabs did. So yes, so www.stephencolewriter.org works.
Yes, indeed.
So that's a good thing. So those are kind of more the current shows, and I've been writing a lot of short stories, and I wrote a novel. And the novel, it's like the end-all and be-all final word on Ethel and Mary. And I'm put them together into this wonderful time travel fantasy story. And I'm hoping that that'll be it. And I won't have to write about Ethel and Mary anymore, because that's it. No more of those stars. But I didn't have them out of my system because I had so many great stories still left that I wasn't able to share. And I didn't want to write a memoir, and I didn't want to write about them non-fiction wise, so I wrote it fiction, but there's a lot of fact in the fiction, so we'll see what happens with that.
It's fascinating. It just sort of ties up all nicely at the end, how at the end of the day you are a prolific storyteller in whatever facet that you can do it.
Yes, I think that is true. And writing the originals has freed me up then to write the short stories and the novel. I don't know if there'll be another novel. We'll see. It took a few years. It was a wonderful experience, and now I want to get it published. But the publishing world is a tough one. I've had 5 published nonfiction books, and the majorist, what a terrible word, the biggest is the Marnie Nixon memoir.
Yes.
I Could Have Sung All Night, which may have a future in the movies.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be fascinating.
We're just they haven't announced it yet, but it is now signed. It has been bought. The rights to the book have been bought. So keep your fingers crossed. We're going to see a movie about Marnie Nixon.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Wonderful.
The Ghostess, they're going to call it, because she was known as the Ghostess with the mostest.
That's right.
So we're excited about that, and so once again, you never know what things come back to you at all. Pretty amazing. Oh, just going back to Merman's Apprentice.
Yes, please.
Going back to Merman's Apprentice a little bit. We did one of our major workshops in London under the. Katie Lipson, who is
she's
a
lovely,
prolific producer, who did The Road to Qatar and produced that in Edinburgh.
And friend of the podcast as well. She's been on many times.
Yeah. And Katie did a workshop in London of that starring Kim Criswell, who was perfect Merman. We've had a lot of perfect Mermans. Obviously, Clea Blackhurst has done it here in this recording, but working with Kim was a blast, and I was in great hopes because Kim has a fairly good name there. It's on the BBC a lot. I'm still in hopes that we can get that show on there. But you do run across the people who think, well, who's Ethel Merman? And that's not the point. It really isn't. But I think when you hear Kim Criswell sing those songs, as she does, she's even done one of the songs from the show in one of her concerts, which is really exciting. She's marvelous. So that's another British connection.
Another link.
And I always want to come back over there. In fact, the producer who was producing Goin Hollywood in Texas is also interested in doing my show, The Night of the Hunter, which I won the Ed Kleban Award for. And we did it in New York, and we did it in Texas. We were going to do it in Texas again, but it was done there. And so now he's making a little trip to London to talk to some people. So
good.
The Night of the Hunter is one of my favorite pieces, and of course has a CD out with Ron Raines and Dorothy Loudon and Sally Mays and incredible 26-piece orchestra. And it's based on the film with Robert Mitchum and Shelley Winters, and it's an amazing piece. But it's a thriller. It's a scary show, and it needs to be done really well. And I could certainly see it in Britain.
Stephen, it has been so fascinating talking to you today. Please keep us up to date with all of your future projects.
Absolutely.
We'd love to hear from you again in the future. And, of course, you're always welcome to chat with us again or
that would
hang
be wonderful.
out for a cup of tea next time you're in Britain. You have to stay in touch.
I can't wait to come over again. See you soon.
Take care, Stephen. Bye-bye.
My thanks again to Stephen for a wonderful chat. And you can follow Stephen's work on his website, which is stephencolewriter.org. And that's Stephen with a PH. There you can learn more about his breadth of work, as well as keep up to date with any future productions of his work. And my thanks to you listeners for once again having me on Musical Talk as your fearless guest presenter. Let's do this again sometime, shall we? And to finish off today's program, let's end with a number from one of Stephen's pieces entitled The Black and White Ball, and one of its very charming numbers entitled 500 of My Closest Friends. See you at the theater soon, folks. Bye-bye for now.
500 of my closest friends, dearest pals, choicest chums. 500 who have made the cut and have learned the proper way to kiss my butt. Minnie, Babe, and Betsy, the Kennedys en masse. Ooh, the Princess Pignatelli. No, she acted like an ass. Garbo, Fonda Dietrich, Mike Nichols, Stephen Sondheim, Andy Warhol, Larry Rivers, and that cute man who delivers all my mail to ensure my RSVPs never fail. The Rolling Stones are out, except for Mick. And Liz can bring along her big old dick. The princess of this, the Maharani of that. Ooh, the Duke and Duchess, the Queen, This book contains, as some wit might say, my international list for the guillotine. 500 of my closest friends, dearest pals, choicest chums. 500 who define excess and whose family income might impress the press. Let's see. Sinatra is invited with his Mia. We assume they'll still be married in the fall. And when Jerry does the boogaloo with Betty, that means Robbins will be dancing with McCall. But I'll tell you a few names that I'm rescinding. The folks who go by Lady Bird and Linden. All the staff would turn to Rexon. It's not because they're Texan. They wouldn't want to let that bag of wind in. No, what really makes the plaza truly nervous is to get the Lyndon Johnsons, you must take the Secret Service. And I don't want to let those White House dicks in. My lord, I might as well ask Richard Nixon. And he's not one of 500 of my closest friends. 500 of my closest friends. Bestest buds, cher ami. 500 of the most elite who know how to kiss my dainty little feet. Will I invite 'em or consign 'em? Gloria Guinness, Gloria Graham, Gloria Steinem. Which Gloria will I allow to glow? Vanderbilt or De Haven? Which glow will get to go? Oh, 500 of my closest friends, allies who made the grade. 500 of my closest. I always say ask 500 friends and you'll make 5,000 enemies. 500 of my closest friends. Now, no peeking.
This episode of Musical Talk presented and edited by David Herzog. Copyright Musical Talk 2020. Except for the songs, which were used with permission from Stephen Cole. And my thanks go to Stephen for allowing me to play his songs on this episode. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Musical Talk, and you can follow me on Twitter at DavidHerzog06 and on Instagram at DavidHerzogActor.